Lewis Hamilton was punished for going just 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over the pit lane limit. Carlos Sainz received 5 seconds after colliding with Oscar Piastri, and both Hamilton and Kimi Antonelli had already lost 3 grid positions before the Hungarian Grand Prix even began. For major penalties, 1 chaotic weekend, and 1 radio message that exposed the frustration. Handing out penalties like crazy. But here is what changes everything. There is no confirmed collective driver revolt against the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. What is confirmed is a penalty-heavy Grand Prix, Hamilton receiving his 4th sanction across only 3 consecutive race weekends, and Anthony Davidson publicly questioning whether a 5-second punishment made sense for an excess of just 1/10. So are the officials protecting safety and consistency? Or has Formula One created a penalty system where microscopic mistakes can destroy entire races? Because Hungary may not have exposed a united rebellion. It may have exposed a much bigger problem that every driver on the grid could face next. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Hungary felt like a breaking point, you have to look at how many separate decisions shaped the weekend before the frustration finally surfaced. This was not one controversial penalty. It was a chain of them. Lewis Hamilton received a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Carlos Sainz received 5 seconds for causing a collision with Oscar Piastri. Before the race even began, Hamilton and Kimi Antonelli had already been handed 3-place grid penalties. One weekend. Several drivers affected. Several results changed. And every new decision made the next one feel even heavier. That is why Hamilton's radio message landed with so much force. Handing out penalties like crazy. The comment was not a speech. It was not a formal protest. And it was not evidence of a united driver rebellion. It was one driver, already carrying the weight of 3 previous sanctions across recent weekends, reacting to yet another punishment. But sometimes, one sentence says more than a long statement ever could. Hamilton did not need to explain the atmosphere. The weekend had already done that for him. His own penalty came from exceeding the pit lane speed limit by only 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. The limit was 80. Hamilton was recorded at 80.1. That tiny excess triggered 5 seconds. And those 5 seconds changed his result. The number was microscopic. The consequence was not. That is where the first real problem appeared. Formula One depends on exact limits. The pit lane is crowded with mechanics, equipment, and moving cars. The speed restriction exists for safety. It cannot become optional simply because the excess appears small. But the punishment created an uncomfortable contrast. 1/10 of a kilometer per hour is almost impossible to feel. It is almost impossible to see. Yet it was enough to change an entire finishing position. And that is why Anthony Davidson questioned the logic of the sanction. He was not denying that Hamilton had crossed the limit. The measurement was clear. The question was whether the punishment matched the scale of the offense. That difference matters. Because a rule can be applied correctly and still create a result that feels disproportionate. And Formula One has always struggled with that balance. Consistency on one side. Context on the other. Officials want clear rules because clear rules reduce argument. Drivers want proportional consequences because not every breach carries the same level of danger or advantage. But the moment officials begin judging scale, another problem appears. Who decides what is small enough to forgive? Who decides when a warning becomes a penalty? Who decides whether 1/10 matters less than 2/10? The hard line disappears. A gray area replaces it. And gray areas are where accusations of inconsistency begin. That is the trap. Strict enforcement can feel brutal. Flexible enforcement can feel unfair. Hamilton's penalty placed Formula One directly between those 2 risks. But his case was only one part of the weekend. Carlos Sainz also received a 5-second penalty after being judged responsible for a collision with Oscar Piastri. At first, that sounds like a standard decision. Cause a collision. Receive a penalty. But there was an important technical detail. The usual sanction would have been 10 seconds. Officials reduced it to 5 because the blue warning lights on Sainz's steering wheel had failed. That mattered because those lights were connected to the information available to him in the moment. The technical failure did not erase responsibility. It did reduce the punishment. And that single decision reveals something very important. The system can consider context. The officials did not simply look at the collision and apply the full standard sanction without further thought. They recognized a genuine technical factor. They adjusted the consequence. That makes Hamilton's case even more interesting. In one situation, context reduced the punishment. In another, the exact measurement produced an immediate 5-second penalty despite the excess being only 1/10. The offenses were different. The safety questions were different. The regulations were different. so the cases cannot be treated as identical. But together, they expose the difficult choices the officials must make. When should context matter? When should the number be absolute? When should a technical issue reduce responsibility? And when should a microscopic breach still trigger the full sporting consequence? Those questions are not simple. And Hungary gave the paddock several reasons to ask them at once. Then there were the qualifying penalties. Hamilton received a 3-place grid drop. Antonelli received the same. Both saw their starting positions changed before the Grand Prix even began. That means the weekend's punishment story did not start during the race. It was already shaping the grid. Already altering strategy. Already changing who would face traffic and who would have clean air. A grid penalty is not just a different starting number. It changes the entire race a driver has to manage. Starting farther back means more cars ahead. More disturbed air. More pressure on the tires. More risk at the first corner. And fewer strategic choices. The official document may say 3 positions. The real sporting cost can spread through every lap that follows. That is why the weekend felt unusually heavy. The penalties were not hidden in the background. They changed visible outcomes. Starting places moved. Finishing positions changed. Drivers had to recover races that had been reshaped before they even began. And once the audience sees several decisions affecting several drivers in one event, the governing body becomes part of the main story. Not the background. The center. But here is the important distinction. There is no confirmed collective driver revolt. No verified group statement. No organized movement. No evidence that several drivers joined together to challenge the penalty system after the race. The only confirmed driver comment about the penalties themselves came from Hamilton. Davidson's criticism came from the commentary box, not from another driver. So the phrase, "drivers lash out," is a dramatic interpretation of the atmosphere. It is not a confirmed united front. That does not mean the tension was imaginary. The number of sanctions was real. Hamilton's frustration was real. The criticism of his penalty was real. What remains unconfirmed is the idea that the grid acted together. And that difference is crucial. A shared atmosphere of frustration is not the same as a formal rebellion. Drivers can privately dislike a decision without organizing against it. They can question consistency without demanding rule changes. They can sympathize with Hamilton without making a public statement. The source does not confirm those reactions either, so they cannot be presented as fact. But the conditions for a wider debate were clearly present. Several penalties. Several changed results. One especially small speed excess. One technical factor reducing another driver's punishment. And one 7-time world champion openly sounding tired of the pattern. That is enough to create pressure. Not necessarily pressure through protest. Pressure through scrutiny. Every future penalty will now be compared with Hungary. Was the offense larger? Was the consequence the same? Did officials consider context? Was the outcome proportionate? Those questions will follow the governing body because Hungary provided several different examples in one weekend. And this is where Formula One faces its bigger problem. The sport needs rules that are clear enough to enforce quickly. But it also needs outcomes that viewers can understand emotionally. When the audience sees 1/10 of a km/h change a result, the rule may be correct, but the punishment can still feel detached from common sense. When another driver receives a reduced penalty because of a technical failure, the system may be acting fairly, but people may still ask why one case allowed context and another did not. Again, the regulations are different. The incidents are different. But public perception does not always separate them cleanly. People see numbers. 5 seconds for Hamilton. 5 seconds for Sainz. 3 places for Hamilton. 3 places for Antonelli. And suddenly, the weekend feels dominated by sanctions rather than racing. That perception matters. Because Formula One is not only governed by rules. It is also watched through emotion. Fans want to believe the drivers decide the race. They want to see overtakes, strategy, tire management, and pressure produce the final order. When penalties repeatedly reshape that order, the sport begins feeling less settled by the track and more settled by documents. That does not mean the documents are unnecessary. Without enforcement, the competition would lose credibility. But enforcement must still feel connected to the offense. That is why Hamilton's 1/10 became the symbol of the weekend. It was easy to understand. 80.1 in an 80 zone. 5 seconds. A changed result. No complicated technical explanation needed. And because it was so easy to understand, it became impossible to ignore. Hamilton's frustration was not proof that the system had failed. It was evidence that the system had created a result difficult to accept emotionally. Davidson's reaction added another layer. A respected commentator also questioned the logic. Still, that was not a driver revolt. It was a growing public debate. And that debate may become more powerful than any organized protest. One official driver meeting can end. One public controversy can follow the sport for months. Every similar case brings it back. Every new penalty reopens the argument. Every tiny excess becomes another comparison. That is how pressure builds. Not through one dramatic rebellion. Through repetition. Hamilton's fourth penalty across 3 consecutive race weekends made his radio message feel like part of something larger. Again, that does not mean the 4 incidents were identical. The source does not provide enough information to group them together technically. But from the driver's perspective, the accumulation matters. One sanction can be accepted. Another can be processed. By the 4th, frustration becomes harder to hide. And that emotional response may be the real warning for Formula One. The rules may still be working exactly as written. But if drivers begin feeling that every marginal moment carries a massive sporting consequence, behavior will change. They may become more cautious. Teams may add larger safety margins. Pittsburgh lane targets may be lowered. Qualifying procedures may become more conservative. That reduces risk. It can also reduce competition. Every fraction surrendered to avoid a penalty is a fraction removed from the battle. That is the hidden consequence. The governing body does not need to change a rule for the grid to start behaving differently. One highly visible penalty can do that by itself. Hamilton's case may already have sent that message. Do not target the limit. Stay below it. Do not leave the smallest uncertainty. Do not assume 1/10 will be treated as insignificant. Because it will not. And once every team begins operating more cautiously, the sport changes. Not dramatically. Quietly. Through safer settings. Earlier braking. More conservative choices. Small decisions made under the memory of what happened in Hungary. That may be good for compliance. But it raises another question. How much competition should teams surrender to protect themselves from punishments that can erase far more time than they were trying to gain? That is the calculation every engineer now understands. Save 1 fraction in the pit lane. Risk losing 5 seconds. The risk is enormous compared with the reward. So teams move away from the line. The rule remains 80. The practical target becomes lower. And the real competitive boundary shifts without any official announcement. That is how one weekend can change behavior across the grid. But before anyone calls this a driver uprising, the truth must remain clear. Hamilton expressed frustration. Davidson questioned the sanction. Several penalties shaped the weekend. No collective lash-out from multiple drivers has been confirmed. No organized revolt has been reported. No united statement has been published. The atmosphere of discontent is real. The organized movement is not established. And that difference matters because the real story is already strong enough. Formula One does not need an invented rebellion to face serious questions. Hungary provided them openly. Was Hamilton's 5-second penalty proportionate to 1/10 of a kilometer per hour? Was Sainz's reduced sanction the correct recognition of a genuine technical failure? Did the grid penalties create consistent outcomes? And can the governing body preserve safety without making the sport feel dominated by punishments? Those are the questions the weekend left behind. Not whether the drivers have already declared war on the officials. Whether the system can continue producing technically correct decisions without losing the trust of the people watching them. Because once fans begin feeling that the race is decided more by penalties than performance, the problem becomes bigger than one driver. Bigger than one team. Bigger than one Grand Prix. And the next penalty will not arrive in isolation. It will arrive carrying the memory of Hungary. 1/10. 5 seconds. Another changed result. And the same uncomfortable question. Is Formula One enforcing the rules perfectly, or has perfect enforcement started creating imperfect racing?